Forced reset triggers. Here is everything you guys need to know. In this video, we're gonna go over quite a few things. We're gonna talk about rare breed triggers and what happened to them. Talk about super safety triggers. We're gonna talk about different brands of these FRT triggers. Before we can get into those, we need to talk about what they actually are and how they function so you guys can understand the logic behind it. This is the question I'm asking you guys. Should we do away with it altogether and say whatever goes, goes and get rid of, the ATF? Or should we redefine the law to make some of these things more exact in its wording? The ATF has the power to interpret the law, not even create laws, just interpret the law. And so something that we have to agree upon, or I set a standard for, is what is the law when it comes to semi-automatic versus fully automatic. Now, the legal definition is when you pull the trigger back, that is considered one action. And if you were to pull a trigger back and more than one bullet leaves your weapon or your barrel, or in some cases barrels, that would be considered automatic. Maybe not fully automatic, but 2 bullets, 1 trigger action would be automatic. That is why that a binary trigger is technically legal, is because it's written by action, not trigger pull and release. So when you pull the trigger backwards and 1 round fires, and then you release the trigger, that's 1 more action. The trigger's now moving forward. By doing so, another round can be fired, okay? So a binary trigger is something that when you pull it super fast, back and forth, you're shooting on each individual action, okay? Totally legal, nothing wrong with that. When it comes to a forced reset trigger, like rare breeds, for example, when the trigger is now resetting, it is forcing your finger forward and the action of the trigger is making an action forward. So when you pull back again, that is a separate action. So in theory, a forced reset trigger is basically just the best possible outcome for semi-automatic to fire at its fastest rate humanly possible. You're using part of the trigger mechanism to force your hand forward, but at any point I can pull my hand off or not pull back and it will not fire. It is different than just holding. It is a very different concept behind that. The trigger is going forward and backwards and forward and backwards and forward and backwards. That is different than how the law is written on a fully automatic weapon or an automatic weapon. So the ATF started rating a lot of manufacturers who were making these types of triggers because they thought they interpreted the law to be that it was fully automatic or automatic weapons. That's not the case. That is why after they went to court, Rare Breeds just announced a few days ago that they're back. They weren't persecuted. They weren't fined for this. They're totally back. They're producing their triggers. They have some fun stuff coming out soon. Same thing with the super safety triggers. My local gun store has got a batch of like 300 of these things. They are back. And the reason being is because the ATF does not have the jurisdiction to create new laws. They have to only enforce the way the law is written. And the way the law is written makes this 100% legal. Now let's talk about how these things work. One of these new ones, new for me I should say, is the super safety trigger. This is a little bit different than normal. I want to show you guys what this looks like kind of in slow motion. Obviously this is just the lower half of an AR-15, okay? And usually these things only go in AR-15 type platforms. They need to be mil-spec, okay? Normally you would have your upper receiver with your bolt carrier group. I didn't want to have that in here so you can actually see what's happening. So when you pull this trigger right here, the hammer is going to go off. When the hammer goes off, it hits the pin. Your round is going to ignite. It goes forward, leaving the barrel. The gas is going to come back and the bolt is going to make this thing close again. It's going to reset, okay? When that happens, the bolt is going to keep going backwards and is going to hit this little lever right here. And see, this lever, when pushed backwards, actually forces my finger forward. It forces the trigger forward. So now 2 actions have taken place. The action of going backward and the action of going forward. Now when the bolt carrier group goes all the way into the buffer tube and it hits the springs and starts to recoil forward, it's going to now hit this lever again and engage it. Now when that happens, if I reapply more pressure backward, the hammer will go off again. Okay, when that happens, the gases leave, it comes flying back, it's going to close the hammer again. It's going to take this little lever right here, push it backwards, which hopefully you guys could see that. It made my finger go forward. Comes back into here, hits it again. If I reapply more pressure, it goes off again. That is how most FRT triggers function, some type of concept like that. Now, the rare breed ones are a little bit different. I can actually open this thing up and show you guys. Different design, same concept, nothing different here. They have a little part right here that engages, okay? This is a very different trigger than like a full auto sear. This is just different designed. Again, it's a forced reset, okay? Not fully automatic. There is still an action happening, the action of going backwards and an action going forwards. Now, what I like about the super safeties, I like about this brand, is you actually have 3 separate positions. You have your safety, if you're on the far left. In the middle, you have what they would consider your forced reset, where this thing is going to go off pretty quickly in rapid concession. And then you have on the far right, you have your single fire mode, or it functions like normal. It kind of disengages this. You don't have that forced reset. Now, in some of these things, like the rare breeds, this specific one, you don't have that. You don't have a 3 position. It is a normal 2 position. You have your safety, and then you have your full forced reset mode, if that makes sense. What I like about the rare breeds version of this is it's just a drop-in trigger. You take your 2 pins out, you loosen up your handle, unscrew that. There's some spring tension. You drop this thing in, put it all back together. You could probably do this if you're good at it, maybe in 5 minutes. Not very hard concept to learn, doesn't require gunsmithing. So that's what I like about this. The super safety ones, a little bit longer because it does come in about, I don't know, 8 different parts. You kind of assemble it yourself and put it in there. Again, not very hard, does not require gunsmithing. It's just not a drop-in trigger. Okay, a little bit more tools required, a little bit more skill needed to do it, but totally doable for the average shooter. So both of these triggers, no single part about these triggers are illegal. And then the outcome of the trigger is also not illegal. About 2 years ago when I was rated by the ATF, they came for other reasons, obviously. I had a whole bunch of these rare breed triggers, and I was a little bit nervous because at the time, rare breed had also been recently raided. Their facilities where they were making these things, they had a cease and desist. I think they ignored that. ATF came in, shut them all down, okay? I had a whole bunch of these things laying out. The ATF agents literally said, we do not care about that. And these were the field agents or ground agents. They literally told me, we do not care about that. We're not here for those reasons. As of right now, these things are totally legal. When they did raid my home, they also said that when these things became illegal, he gave me the advice to bury them in my backyard, is what he said. So I know the ATF gets a lot of crap sometimes because the head of the ATF is pretty corrupt. But remember that a lot of these people who work for the ATF or even the FBI, they're just normal people like you and I. They have their personal opinions, and the guys that came to my home were pretty chill about the force reset triggers. So a lot of people think that these things work flawlessly, and they don't. I'm going to consider these things, same with binary triggers, I would say these things are more on the gimmick side. The reason being is because it's not fully automatic and that it is still a semi-automatic platform shooting at as fast capacity as possible, it's going to have hiccups or errors. The timing of this is really important. There are all kinds of problems, including your buffer weight. This is a light one. You should probably use a heavier one because that means it's going to go back a little bit slower and then come forward a little bit slower. So you don't have any type of live round going off before it's supposed to, causing a out of battery detonation. That's what I was looking for. You don't want that to happen, and I've seen some horror stories. I've never seen it in person, but I've seen some videos of FRT triggers causing catastrophic issues that have caused damage to the user. So you want to be careful about that. Also adjusting, how much gas is coming back can help with this. But the biggest thing that they say on most packages, actually, it says use heavier buffers right here recommended. So all this stuff has to be kind of fine-tuned to make sure that it works perfectly. What we ended up doing in one of our recent videos was we took the Gaboa Snake. This is a double barrel AR-15, has a lot of things, including 2 triggers. What I like about that is that I could go ahead and put 2 drop-in triggers into this thing, these rare breed triggers, and in theory, it would both shoot out both sides fully semi-automatic. And it worked super well. If you guys want to check out that video, we'll have a link in the description. I can't show that in this video because YouTube has a policy against shooting fully automatic weapons on camera. They make you be signed in and 18 years of age or older, which means that if you're not signed into YouTube, you'll never be able to watch fully automatic weapons being fired. It's their policy, not mine. You can put these things into these guns and they work decently well, but again, it's a gimmick because it doesn't work perfectly. I would not consider any of these things to be reliable. The more moving parts, the more failure points cause it to not be trusted, in my personal opinion. If I had to go to war for some reason, let's say that, I don't know, Canada decides to invade America. They don't want to become the 51st state. And we have to go to war. I'm not going to grab something like this as my primary weapon of choice, or any weapon of choice. The last thing I want is a failure happening, whether it's in the timing or whether it's in the part kind of being rounded down. These parts, after a lot of wear and tear, they begin to slip or not work perfectly. Full disclosure, I don't have a lot of time downrange with these super safeties, but I also know that they don't always work flawlessly, okay? If you needed a fully automatic weapon to go to war with, if the world gets there, you're probably just going to use a normal sear and turn it into a fully automatic weapon that way, not with some type of drop-in trigger or gimmick. So to answer the question, yes, they are 100% legal. That is why these companies have started manufacturing these things once again. Will you ever get in trouble for them? No, you shouldn't legally. But now if there's a range officer, or if there is, I don't know, local law enforcement and they hear something firing that quickly, you are in danger of being potentially arrested for having a fully automatic weapon if you don't have the paperwork to go with it. Out in the desert where I shoot at, that is not the time and place to try to convince law enforcement that this is not full auto. This is they may not know the difference. Just because you're law enforcement doesn't mean that you know every single law associated with or the proper definitions. I've had a lot of people while I've been shooting these FRTs think that they are fully automatic when they're not. Now, if that guy maybe was law enforcement or ATF or someone who just was lesser exposed to this type of firearms and gimmicks, they may put me in handcuffs. I don't know what may happen. Now, I'll have my time in court to fight this, obviously, but just be careful with where you're shooting at and what you have. The next thing is you don't want to maybe show these things on camera if for some reason they change the law and how it's written and you're showing off, you know, on YouTube or Instagram or with your friends and you have video documentation of these things. The last thing you want is for them to become illegal. We changed the wording, which is very possible they could do that. And all of a sudden now they're coming after you because they have either receipts that you purchased it or they can see online that you have one, that you shot one. So one of the best arguments that I've heard to maybe, because I do agree to some degree, we have to be realistic here. It gets so close to being considered full auto that I could not hear the difference. And I'm a pretty well trained shooter. I could not hear the difference between real full auto or a gimmick full auto or fully semi-automatic platform. So what we have to consider here is it how fast you're shooting your weapon? Because some people can pull that trigger and release and pull the trigger and release a typical normal trigger, you know, on a different AR-15. They could do that so quickly that the rate of fire may be double or triple or quadruple mine personally without a gimmick, if that makes sense. Some people are very slow to shoot. They're very, you know, their motor sensory skills are a little bit slower. They have to pull and think about it, release, pull and release. So how do we define something as fully automatic? It can't just be how it's currently written, and it certainly can't be on how fast you can shoot something, because then someone who can shoot faster, by whatever reasons, could get in trouble for that. We can't time it that way. And so right now, the way the law is written, I think is pretty decent. It's a trigger action, but as we keep coming up with these types of gimmicks, and there are a lot of smart people out there that find loopholes, will it get to a point where it's so close to being fully automatic that you literally cannot tell the difference? And at what point do we kind of have to say, hey, enough is enough? Obviously, I trust myself with this power, but there are some people out there, I don't trust them to have guns, to be honest, and to be fair. I especially don't trust them to have this type of a gimmick, especially if the gimmick becomes something that's functioning flawlessly. If it's repeatable and if it's consistent, I don't want this type of power in the wrong hands. And so this is the question I'm asking you guys. Should we do away with it altogether and say whatever goes, goes and get rid of, you know, the ATF? Or should we redefine the law to make some of these things more exact in its wording? That way we don't have the question of how the ATF can interpret certain laws. The argument is that pretty soon here, Congress will change how these laws are written, because these were laws that were not in the Constitution. The Constitution just says the right to bear arms. It does not say the right to have certain type of arms or gimmicks that can create fallout. Those were all part of the NFA, you know, the National Firearms Act of 1934, and then actually fully automatic weapons is what, 86? So do we have to then turn over that? This is getting dangerously close, but it's still legal. My advice to you guys is this: do what you feel like is constitutionally protected according to current law and constitutional laws. If you guys think that you guys have the legal right to own and fire these things, great, go do that. I'm not gonna tell you not to. If you're worried about it being a problem in the near future, then just don't dabble in it, you know? Just watch it on YouTube. For me, I've been very parent about my opinion on this stuff. I want to continue to shoot it until I see a law that says that I cannot. But as of right now, there's no law saying that you can't own and fire these things.